It's so funny, ASUS right now basically make the biggest phone you can buy, this is the ROG Phone 7, and the smallest phone you can buy, or one of them, this is the new ZenFone 10. Would they make something in between? A ZenFone Pro or Plus or Pro Max or something at some point? We shall see, but for now, we're talking about this guy, the new ZenFone 10. Is this little compact flagship level phone actually worth buying? Well, maybe. I do love this thing. There's a lot to like, but also there's a couple of issues I do have with it. Anyway, we'll come to that. Firstly, let me give you a little bit of a size comparison. So here on the left, we have the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra. On the right, an iPhone 14 Pro Max. And then in the middle, the positively cute ASUS ZenFone 10. But don't let its small size fool you. This is a bit of a beast. So why would you want to buy one of these? Well, essentially it is all about the size, the compact 5.9-inch screen, while also packing in some pretty impressive, mostly flagship level specs, and also for good measure, we've got a headphone jack as well. There's just something refreshing about using a smaller phone where you don't have to do finger gymnastics to reach the top. It will comfortably fit in any pocket or crossbody bag or clutch bag or whatever it is you use. But of course, it's not alone. It does have some small competition. The smallest phone really you can buy is the iPhone SE, which itself is noticeably smaller. But the problem with this is the battery is pretty terrible. It's actually too small for most people, and also not everyone wants to be on iOS and the Apple ecosystem. In terms of Android competition, you've got maybe the Pixel 7a. It's more affordable, a little bit bigger, 6.1 inches versus 5.9. Although actually, the new Pixel Fold's front cover screen is 5.8 inches, so it's technically a little bit smaller than this, and maybe also you could wait for the Galaxy Flip 5, perhaps? So there are alternatives, but there's still something about the ZenFone 10 that I just really like. Now, compared to last year's ZenFone 9, and here is one I made earlier, the design is broadly similar. The two big camera lenses are slightly less pronounced. The back also has a new material that feels more like, how do I put this, scratchy recycled cardboard maybe? It reminds me of the Pixel 5a, if you remember that. And I do like it. It's a more sustainable polycarbonate material, it doesn't pick up smudges or fingerprints, and it is nice and grippy. And it retains the headphone jack, the dual speakers, the IP68 dust and water resistance, the dual SIM, although still no micro SD sadly, and also once again the power button on the side doubles as a fingerprint reader. Now, they were actually kind enough to send over 2 review units of the ZenFone 10. This is the Eclipse Red, I believe, as well as the Comet White. Both lovely colors, but certainly the red's a lot more striking. And these are in addition to the Aurora Green, Starry Blue, and Midnight Black options. I also quite like how this aluminium frame around the side can be a different color as well. So we've got red and black here and white and silver here. So fairly subtle design changes then going from the 9 to the 10. The big upgrades really are on the inside. And the headliner really is the new Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip. We also have faster RAM and faster storage, a slightly longer battery life in the order of 10 to 15%. More exciting though is we do now get wireless charging. It is just your basic 15-watt Qi, but it's better than nothing. We also get a much improved 32 megapixel selfie camera, along with even better stabilization, courtesy of the 6-axis hybrid gimbal that's built into the main camera. The Full HD AMOLED screen now also supports a 144Hz refresh rate, although frustratingly it is only available in games that support it. And we also get a handful of new software features, a couple of new color options, and this design and the packaging are a lot more environmentally friendly this time around. So a nice little upgrade over the ZenFone 9, and I think considering the, as I say, mostly flagship specs, the price is pretty reasonable as well. Now technically they have increased the price. Last year they started at £699 here in the UK, now it starts at £749, but that's because they've bumped up the storage from 128 to 256 as the new entry model along with 8 gigs of RAM. You can pay £70 more, so 820 quid if you want to double the storage and double the RAM to 16 and 512, which is a pretty impressive spec for £820, although I reckon the base model is all you're going to need. Kind of sits between, say, a OnePlus 11 and a Pixel 7 Pro in that lower flagship tier. The most significant upgrade though is that new chip, the 8 Gen 2, and while we're long past the point where new chips have any real impact in day-to-day scrolling, for demanding games or if you're video editing, it is quite a bit faster. Firing up the 3D Mark Extreme stress test, the ZenFone 10 is 33% faster. Even the lowest loop score is still 20% higher than last year. And if we scroll down, despite the high performance, it actually used less battery. The only downside is it did get a bit hotter, and I have noticed while gaming, the ZenFone 10 can get quite warm, not uncomfortably so, but it is noticeable. I am very happy to see they have improved the battery life. Not a crazy amount, and in fact this does use the same size cell as last year, it's still 4300 milliamps, but in my real world test versus last year, when this kicked the bucket, when this ran out of juice, the ZenFone 10 still had 8% of its battery left, which is about 45 minutes or so depending on what you're doing. Easily enough for a full day of use, but maybe not a whole lot more beyond that. Heavy gaming will obviously drain it faster, and speaking of which, you can see some of that ASUS ROG pedigree creeping in here with the ZenFone. We do now have that 144Hz refresh option, and while you're gaming, if you swipe in from the corner, it'll bring up their Game Genie, where you have a wealth of options and modes to play around with. But equally important to good hardware is good software, and I think ASUS's Zen UI is fantastic, as you can choose between what is basically just stock Android 13, or you have their own ASUS optimized version, which is what I've chosen to go with here, and it adds some nice extras like Edge Panel for quick app shortcuts. I quite like how in the display settings you have access to the animation speeds, which are usually hidden away in the dev menu, and I do find switching everything to 0.5 times makes the phone feel even snappier. The power button is also a smart key that can bring down the notification bar or even fast forward and rewind videos now. And even the back of the phone is a customizable button with a double tap opening the camera or taking a screenshot, whatever you like. And if you are looking at this thinking, I like it, but it's still just a bit too big for me, well, you're in luck, because they do still offer a one-handed mode, which you can turn on and then swipe down from the bottom to shrink the screen. So the software is nice and fast, very little in the way of bloatware, it's lovely. The problem is, ASUS only offered 2 years of Android updates with this, which is way behind the 3 and 4 years that most competitors now offer, and it's a bit disappointing. And finally, let's talk about this camera system, because surprisingly, not a whole lot has actually changed here. Well, here on the back at least. Same resolution, same sensors, same apertures, basically the same dual camera system as we had last year. However, despite very similar hardware, ASUS do say they have improved the cameras, thanks to some tuning and benefits from the new Snapdragon chip's ISP. Photos are a touch sharper, and some of the light trail modes that used to require a tripod can now be done handheld. And also we have the second generation of their 6-axis hybrid gimbal stabilizer, which to be fair is genuinely really good. And this year we get real-time adaptive EIS for video, which means it automatically and in real time picks the best field of view while maintaining the smooth video, whereas last year you had to pick the different modes yourself before you started shooting. So that is very helpful. And in terms of stabilization, it absolutely keeps up with the iPhone 14 Pro as I walk over these cobblestone streets. And this is shot at 4K 60, plus we do have the option of 8K 24. The problem is the quality just isn't as good. You can see colors are more washed out, it really struggles with the bright highlights on Mrs. Tech Chap's t-shirt there, and it's noticeably less detailed. Fair enough, the iPhone is more expensive, but I did expect a bit more out of this. For example, I actually wanted to start this review with this little video which I shot on the ZenFone 10, but as good as the stabilization might be, the quality just wasn't good enough. It's underexposed and a bit slow to focus. Switching to photos, and I must admit, when I took these shots and then looked at them back in the gallery app on the phone, I was quite impressed, but now I've taken them off the phone and I'm looking a bit more closely, I'm not so sure. The skin tones are off. I mean, here my face is just red. There's very little texture or detail, and yet somehow it also has that over-sharpened look to it. As always, lighting makes all the difference, and some shots I actually do quite like, but generally I found colors just aren't quite right, or maybe they're oversaturated, and obviously there's no telephoto lens here either. Portraits can sometimes be okay, and then other times it looks like I've photoshopped myself into the scene. Even if it is marginally better than the ZenFone 9, I still find the camera just a little bit disappointing. The good news though is the selfie camera is a lot better this year. They've moved to a new RGBW sensor, which lets in 67% more light, and they've also reduced the noise by 50%, so the selfie camera is a big upgrade, except for the fact that it no longer supports autofocus, which it did on the ZenFone 9, which is a bit bizarre and disappointing, and also it is still limited to 1080p 30 for a 2023 flagship phone. Although what I do like is this little LED light that surrounds the selfie camera, so you and your friends know where to look. So where does that leave us? Well, I've written a little list here of the downsides of the ZenFone 10. Firstly, no LTPO screen. It is either 60, 90, 120 or 144 Hz, and actually the always-on display is still stuck at 30 Hz, which obviously isn't great for the battery life. It's also not the brightest. This tops out at 1100 nits peak. Most phones, especially this price point, can go up to 1600 nits, so it is not the brightest. The 15-watt Qi wireless charging is a very welcome upgrade, but it's still not very fast, nor is the regular 30-watt wired charging. Again, no change there compared to last year's ZenFone 9. Still no telephoto camera. I still think the camera quality itself is a bit average, even though I do like the gimbal stabilizer and I do appreciate the improved selfie camera. So the ZenFone 10 is not perfect, but for £750, I do still think it's definitely worth considering, particularly if you do want a smaller phone. And while it is a decent step up over the ZenFone 9, I reckon if you can find this on a good deal, there's not that much of a difference between these guys, particularly if you're not going to miss, say, wireless charging, that this may not actually end up being a better value option. Let me know what you make of this, and if you have any questions in the comments below. If you did enjoy this review and want to see more from me, a cheeky like and subscribe will be very much appreciated, and I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat.